She cannot breathe Earth's air. He met her on a night when the wind tasted like rain and the sea kept its promises. Aidan worked the graveyard shift at the cliffside observatory, a place of rusted stairs and patient machines that turned their faces to the sky like sunflowers that had outlived the sun. He tuned receivers the way some people pray, making small adjustments and then listening with his whole body. The dishes swept the horizon swept him, and on most nights nothing swept back. The signal arrived as a hush that made all other silences lean in. It was not a code. It was a presence. The air in the control room seemed to gather around a single note, low and steady, as if someone far away were breathing in a room he could almost enter. He recorded it. He played it back. He spoke to it. "Hello," he said, feeling foolish and tender at once. "If you can hear me, I'm here." The note answered by turning fractionally warmer, the way a hand does when it finds another hand. He slept at the console that night and dreamed of a shoreline made of singing glass. 3 moons braided light across dark water. A city rose from the sea like a crown. At the end of the singing shore stood a woman with starlight braided through silver hair. She lifted her hand, palm open, as if he'd kept a promise without knowing its name. "My name is Lysa," said the space between them. He woke with the taste of salt in his mouth and a new coordinate, written down in his own handwriting. The nights after that were doorways. He would calibrate the dishes by muscle memory and then step through the last routine as if it were a threshold. The note became a voice. The voice became a shore. The shore became a person whose eyes held not just distance, but arrival. She told him of her world, Pelagia, where the air was thick and sweet-rich in inert gases and ocean vapor, threaded with biolumens so faint you could taste light on the back of your tongue. She told him she was a princess because her people named their guardians with songs, and her song had been chosen to keep cities held high above restless seas. "On my world," she said, "we learn to breathe at the same time we learn to speak. Breath is a language the world speaks into us. On mine," he said, "we forget that breath is a gift and then remember it when we're scared." "Then I am talking to someone very awake," she said. And when she smiled, he felt something old and careful inside him open its hands. The bond grew like a careful tides, small surges, long patience. He learned the measured cadence of her speech and the way laughter made the line of her mouth tilt like a crescent moon. She learned how his silences were full of repairs. He filled them with oiling hinges, mending cables, writing down the names of stars as if they were neighbors he could visit. They learned, too, the first boundary, and it arrived as a fact as simple as rain. "I cannot breathe your air," she said one night when the shore smelled of winter. "Earth's atmosphere would burn my lungs. Your oxygen is a storm to us." Aidan felt the small wound of that truth, like a paper cut he would discover again and again. He chose to let it bleed into purpose. "Then we will build the kind of meeting that doesn't require us to die for it," he said. It began with glass and listening. He repurposed an abandoned weather dome on the observatory roof, polishing its panels until the sky learnt the habit of showing itself. He wrote to 3 universities and a shipyard with a dying contract and traded a year of maintenance for a week of their engineering. Lysara sent designs for a micro-atmosphere halo the size of a crown, delicate as jewelry and strong as a promise. They tuned it together across distance, adjusting gas ratios and filtration rates until the simulations stopped failing. The first time she crossed the relay, The night went very quiet, and then remembered how to sing. She stepped into the dome like a dawn you could walk through. The halo glowed faintly around her head, a clear ellipse filled with a fine mist that caught the light like snowfall. Condensation purled along the rim where inner climate met outer cold. Aidan took one step, then another, and stopped just shy of the glass. She stopped too, and for a small eternity they were two people learning a new grammar of proximity. He put his palm to the halo. She matched it from inside. Warmth reached him as a press through the barrier, like a heartbeat cupped in glass. "You're here," he said, which was the oldest prayer in any language. "I am," she said, and he heard in the way she said it that she had traveled through more than space to arrive. They made a ritual of the dome. On clear nights he would carry up a thermos of tea that steamed in the cold, and she would bring a vial of lumens that pulsed like sleeping stars. They would sit with foreheads nearly touching, separated by the whispered-in shield, and describe the world in pieces small enough to share across a membrane. He taught her the names of birds that hunted the surf. She taught him how her people measured tides by taste and song. Once. Fog rolled in so thick it seemed the hill itself was breathing. The dome became a lit seed. They watched halos bloom on the beaks of gulls as they cut through the vapor. Lysara's breath made a small cloud inside her crown. Aidan watched it lift and fall and found a new definition for intimacy. "On Pelagia," she said, "we know that not sharing breath is a kind of respect. It means we wish each other to live. On Earth," he said, "we confuse closeness with safety. I'm learning otherwise." When he asked to see her world, she brought him in dream first, because love has good instincts about how much a body can bear. He stood on her singing shore while his chest remembered the earth's gravity. The air smelled like rain that had decided to be music. The first time he set foot in Pelagia awake, he wore a rebreather of his own heavy around his shoulders, humming with pumps that fed him a mix gentle enough not to drown him in sweetness. The city rose from bright water as if the ocean had learned architecture. People turned to look, and no one pretended not to. "Does it hurt?" she asked him when he stumbled over the high sill of a doorway. "Only the parts of me that want to impress you," he said. And she laughed, and the street felt less like a stage and more like a road. The first true danger arrived without malice, the way weather sometimes does. A winter storm climbed the cliff and chewed at the power lines that fed the dome. Aidan woke to alarms, describing their fear in numbers. By the time he reached the roof, the wind had found purchase and the dome rattled like a drum. Inside, Lysara stood very still, one hand braced against the inner pane, the other touching the rim of her crown. Tiny eddies spun inside the halo, warning signs of pressure drift. He moved like a man threading between one heartbeat and the next. He checked seals by touch, because fingers know sooner than eyes. He anchored the emergency generator with his body while the storm tried to persuade both of them to let go. "Talk to me," he said. Through the intercom they never needed until they did. Her voice arrived as a steadiness he could tie rope to. "Small bubble rising," she said. "Right side of the collar. Trace variance in argon. The regulators are performing, but frightened." He thought of all the machines he had calmed in his life by naming their fears and speaking back in the language they spoke. He bled a fraction of Earth into the emergency mixer and then stitched it with what Pelagia called home. The halo cleared. Her shoulders lowered a fraction. Afterward, when the wind stepped down from its argument, they stood with their palms resting on the same circle of glass. They did not talk about how close they had come. They talked about breakfast. The danger that followed did not wear Weather's honest face. People on every world fear what they cannot breathe. A local official arrived with a clipboard and a policy about atmospheric hazards. He was polite in the way that means get out. He asked for permits that didn't exist, for insurance that could not imagine the dome, 4 signatures from boards that could not recognize the dome as a kind of hospital for hope. Asterisk, Lysara listened and let Aidan answer. He chose patience and facts. He explained gas exchange and fire suppression and fail-safes. He did not explain love. What if the device fails? The official asked. Then we do what neighbors do, Aidan said. We run toward the trouble. It was the wrong answer for the form and the right answer for the man. The official looked at him for a long time and then quietly folded the clipboard. I will not be the reason you to stop teaching my children what it means to meet, he said. And he left them with a warning and his card. They built a house because houses are arguments against despair. It was not large. It did not need to be. On the cliff near the observatory, they raised a structure of glass and filament where 2 atmospheres could meet without war. The central wall was a membrane grown in a lab that learned from both skies. It bowed and sang and allowed heat to pass and not poison. Chairs faced each other on either side like pews in a chapel that had forgotten which way the altar was. On the mantel, a pair of small stones sat side by side, one from the singing shore, one from the beach below the cliff. When touched together through the membrane, they vibrated with the exact same note. They wrote vows without ceremony. They wrote them at the kitchen table with mismatched cups and the sound of the sea counting time. I will not ask you to be less alive so I can be more comfortable. I will build rooms for your breath in my house and in my thinking. When fear arrives, I will not hide it from you or weaponize it. When I cannot repair, I will love. When I can repair, I will. They signed with their full names and the names they only used for each other when the world slept. They pressed the paper to the membrane and watched ink mirror ink until the vows belonged to both sides. Some days were holy for no reason. A gull figured out how to ride the updraft by their window and performed for an audience of 2. A squall arrived carrying the smell of lightning and left the glass glittering with unintended stars. They learned each other's small hungers, the way he needed to fix something with his hands when sorrow passed the house, the way she needed him to describe a human holiday until it felt like a place she could visit. Some nights were hard. The relay would shiver and give them static. The halo would fog in a way that made him stand up too fast. On those nights they did not invent bravery. They kept company with exactly what was happening. He would play a low melody on a guitar he kept tuned to the key of her name. She would hum along in harmonics only the house could hear. The membrane would sing them both to sleep. When he traveled to Pelagia, he learned humility more thoroughly than any classroom had managed. The first time he laughed hard wearing his rebreather, the mask choked and then apologized with a soft beep. Lysara pointed and then put her hands over her mouth, contrite and amused. On my world, she said, we do not laugh when people learn new gravity. On mine, he said, we laugh and then help each other up. Then I will do both, she said, and did. He met her mother, who wore a crown that looked like a wave, deciding to become a mountain. The regent's eyes were oceans taught to count. She did not smile when she greeted him. She watched him with a stillness that meant a verdict was already on its way. He bowed because some instinct older than custom told him to. We share air badly, the regent said. We share tides well. Show me you know the difference. He stood with Lysara in the hall of pumps and listened while the city spoke in pulse and pressure. Together they tuned a chorus of towers that had drifted out of conversation with the sea. He named the misalignments in a human language, and then learned her words for them, because names matter. When the floor settled and the distant waves answered with a sound that meant yes, the regent closed her eyes and nodded once, as if to a truth that had travelled a long way to reach her. You repair with your hands, she said to Aiden. You repair with your listening, she said to her daughter. Keep both tools sharpened. Years gathered like shells in a bowl. They did not count them. They counted dinners eaten on both sides of the membrane, counted storms survived, counted new words they invented to name the small things no one had bothered to name before because no one had needed them. They hosted children from both worlds in the house on the cliff. The children put their palms to the membrane and made faces at each other until they laughed. And then they sat and drew pictures of the same bird in two different skies. Once, during a spring power outage that turned the town behind them into a necklace of candlelight, the halo's inner climate slipped when a backup heater failed. Lysara's breath became shallow and quick, the way tide retreats to fast before a wave with an old idea. Aiden did not think. He moved. He hauled a portable generator from the shed and sang numbers to keep his hands from skipping steps. He spoke to her through the intercom with a steadiness he wished he felt. 10 seconds, he said, then heat. Then 5 breaths. Then tea. Bossy, she whispered, voiced thin as silk. I love you. The generator caught. Warmth returned. Her pulse in the display unclenched. He set the tea by the membrane on his side. She set a vial of lumens by hers. They watched steam rise and light sleep and allowed their bodies to learn safety again. Later, when danger was a story and not a threat, they sat with their feet pressed to the same pane and made a map of what to change. He moved the second generator closer. She added a fail-safe valve that did not require heroics to operate. Love, they wrote on the margin of the map, is not a test we pass by almost dying. It is a practice we keep by staying. They never kissed skin to skin. They never pretended this was a lack. They learned a different intimacy that asked more of attention than of air. Mouth to glass, breath to breath, a kind of kiss travelled that grew as real as any other because they chose to honor it as real. On the anniversary of the night the signal first arrived, the town gathered on the lawn below the observatory with blankets and jars of fireflies. The mayor spoke for a moment about courage and then wisely stopped. People turned their faces up. The dishes turned their faces up. Aiden looked across the membrane at Lysara and found her looking back. They placed their palms together. The crowd saw 2 hands separated by an invisible line and didn't see the work that made it a joining. In the quiet that followed the speeches, an old man who had once threatened to shut them down stood and cleared his throat. He was small in the way people become small when time has made room for something larger behind the eyes. I thought breath meant ownership, he said. Mine, yours. I thought air was territory. I was wrong. Air is an agreement. Thank you for teaching me how to keep it. After the crowd went home, the sky did a simple, holy thing. It emptied itself of cloud, and the stars showed their old faces. Lysara leaned her head against the inside of the halo. Aiden leaned his forehead against the outer glass. Nothing between them changed, and everything did. Stay, he asked, though she was already here. Go with me, she asked, though he was already on her shore. They laughed softly at the old habit of questioning, and then fell quiet. The sea spoke in the tongue that puts boats to sleep at anchor. The dome held its small climate like a held breath. Beyond the membrane, the house glowed the way safe places glow when the world outside remembers a hard night and chooses, for once, to be kind. When Aidan finally slept, he did not fall as if into a well. He fell as rivers fall, toward the shape made for them. He dreamed of 2 rooms divided by a living pain, and in the dream the pain thinned to a veil. And in the veil he could see their life as if from a height, repairs and meals and storms and small domestic mercies. He woke with the sure knowledge that they had not defeated distance. They had taught it a better job. In the morning he rose early and wrote a letter he did not need to send. He signed it and set it on the mantel between the 2 stones. Lysera read it through the glass without touching it, because some things are meant to cross without hands. I will not ask you to breathe what hurts you. I will not treat safety as an apology. I will guard the rooms we've made. When the world is frightened, I will not become its echo. When it is kind, I will say yes. You are not a miracle I have trapped. You are a person I am lucky to meet across a border we have taught to sing. She pressed her palm to the membrane. He matched it. Warmth traveled. Breath traveled. The day began, ordinary and sacred, the way good days do. People came to learn from them and left with better questions than the ones they arrived with. They built 2 more houses like theirs in other towns in other countries. Pelagia raised a hall where earth air could enter in a taut ribbon without unmaking what it touched. Children grew up thinking it was normal to drink tea with someone whose breath required engineering. Emergency manuals were rewritten with gentler words. They grew older not with tragedy, but with use. His hair silvered. Her halo's glow softened. Their hands knew where to go on the glass without looking. On the last night they stood at the dome together. The sky put on a show just for them. A meteor stitched light from one horizon to the other, and for a heartbeat it looked like a bridge a god had remembered to build. They touched foreheads to the pain, and let that be the last lesson the sky taught them that day. We love without asking each other to drown. We meet without asking the air to lie. We stay because staying is the work, and work is love with its sleeves rolled up. When the lights went out in the house, and the sea kept speaking, and the wind remembered it was not an enemy, they slept easily on either side of the singing glass. If anyone had asked them, in the morning, what romance looks like, they would have pointed to the membrane and the tea mugs and the toolbox and the crown with its soft mist and said, here, where 2 kinds of breath learned to keep company without trying to be the same. Here, where a princess and a mechanic taught the air to behave like a friend. Here, where love wrote its vows, not on paper alone, but on the habits of a house that knew how to hold 2 worlds at once and call the combination home.